You're listening to the TEPIS Paranormal Talking Point podcast, a show that discusses various aspects of the paranormal world, with paranormal news, ghost stories, interviews, and much more. And without further ado, let's get into some talking points. Hi guys, Scott here from TEPIS Paranormal, and welcome back to another episode of the TEPIS Paranormal Talking Point podcast. Today, my guest is Jeff Belanger, a paranormal researcher, folklorist, and author who has also worked on every episode of Ghost Adventures. Jeff also has his own podcast, and is one of the most well-known names within the paranormal community. I had a chance to sit down with Jeff and ask him his views on a number of different paranormal things, discuss a number of projects he's worked on, and generally talk to him about his views on the paranormal. So a big thank you to Jeff for joining me for this interview, and I hope you enjoy. So, thanks for joining me, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
So, from a bit of research I've done, you're described online in a lot of different ways. A folklorist, an author, an adventurer, a paranormal researcher. The one that really stood out for me the most was Legend Tripper.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about that and what it means?
Sure. So, if you've ever seen any paranormal investigation show ever in the history of the universe, from the first one to the most recent, it starts with legend tripping.
Mm-hmm.
Someone heard a story that they thought was interesting enough that they wanted to go check it out. So most in folklore studies, mostly, when you're a kid, I remember when I was growing up, there was this one grave across the street from where my friend lived. He lived across from a cemetery, and it was a monument above ground, like a crypt. And the story was that if you knocked on it 3 times at midnight, a witch would jump out. And so we would have sleepovers, and of course it's like almost quarter of midnight or so. And you look at each other and you go, should we go try it? And your logical brain says, I don't expect a witch to jump out if I knock 3 times. But there's a part of you that's truly afraid that she might. And so we sneak over there in the middle of the boneyard in the middle of the night. And it's just, everybody's watching their watch, and it just strikes midnight. And then, of course, someone knocks 3 times, and then you go racing back to your friend's house, and the witch may have jumped out. We'd have no way of knowing because we were so far gone. Yeah. we just raced home. And so that's legend tripping. Now, you could hear a building is haunted, an old castle or something like that. And you go there and you might take it to another level, which would be like the next step would be paranormal investigation or bring in a medium or whatever. But it starts with a story. And when I say legend, that doesn't mean I think it's fiction per se. It just means that the story precedes it, that the legend precedes it and is bigger than the building itself, the history itself, the person itself, and so on.
Cool. So in terms of the paranormal, what are your beliefs? Do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in cryptids, things like that?
So this is my favorite part of the paranormal, is that it allows us to have discussions that are as old as time, right? And so what you're asking is, what is reality? Right? And that's and the best answer I've ever heard to that question is perception is reality. So if I look up in the sky and I see a round craft with lights flashing about and it's darting all across the sky, the best I can give you is that I believe that's a UFO. It is unidentified, it is flying, it is an object. I don't believe we're alone in the universe. So is that from some distant galaxy? Maybe, right? I believe in ghosts because I've had experiences I can't explain with any other word to you, although exactly what they are, I can't say. I don't know, right? I mean, I just know that I've perceived them, and as have others. Cryptids as well. I've never seen Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster or lake monsters or anything like that, but I've talked to people who have. They don't seem crazy. And not only that, when someone sees like a cryptid creature, it's usually the narrative is so similar, right? I was in the woods. I'm a hunter. I've been in these woods my whole life. I know every single creature in here, from skunks to deer to, everything else. And suddenly this thing walked by that just didn't belong. And so, yes, I believe in all of the above. What they are, well, that the jury is still out.
Cool. So I know you said obviously you believe in ghosts because you've had experiences.
Mhm.
I know you had an experience in the Paris Catacombs Museum. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that was my first, where I would say, like, bona fide ghost experience, and that was 2003. And I had been writing about ghosts at that point for like 6 or 7 years. um and I started in all this as a journalist, as a newspaper reporter, and i I interviewed people, and I didn't think they were lying to me. Some may have been, right, or some might have just been confused or delusional, but I thought for the most part people were very genuine. And I would take the position that, like, well, I believe that you believe. But when you have your own experience, it sort of changes you lose some of that objectivity. So I was down there alone because no one would go with me. And there was nobody there that day. It was just me walking around down there below the city, where there's just millions of human bones
Yeah.
that have been stacked up in this very macabre and intricate pattern. And as I was walking down this long hallway that was no wider than, fingertip to fingertip on
Hmm.
either side, I saw what looked like a man step out from one side and go to the other and then come back. And I froze because I said, okay, wait a minute. No one came from behind me. They would have literally bumped into me. And then I thought, okay, is there a side tunnel up there? And I missed it and someone's down here, but nope, there's no side tunnel. It's just a long straightaway all the way to the end. And I went, okay, this must be what they're talking about. I don't consider myself psychic or sensitive or otherwise.
Hmm.
And this thing just happened. And the analogy I've used is that it's kind of like a lightning strike. We know lightning strikes the earth many, many times a day all over the planet, but not usually right next to where we're standing.
Yeah.
And if it does strike right next to where you're standing, you will never, ever forget it the rest of your life. And so I believe it happens. It's rare, but not that rare. And that day I was there to see it. And I've been back since. And I'm going back again in June. This year I'll be going back for a third time. And I will go right back to that same spot. The second time I went there, I can tell you nothing happened. you know? And the third time, who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, I think seeing a full apparition from stories I've heard is quite rare. Sort of in the sense of what people tend to share. It tends to be lesser things, footsteps, voices, things like that. I think the actual full-bodied apparition, or at least from people I've spoken to, tends to be a rarer thing to see, but obviously is one of the more physically impressive when you see it.
So, in my experience, interviewing thousands of people that have had
Hmm.
this this encounter of some kind, um, there's a whole spectrum, and it affects really all of the human senses. Sometimes it's a smell, like, you smell grandma's perfume, or grandpa's cigar or whatever. Or it's a feeling. You sense someone there, or you hear something. Seeing something, I think, is a little more rare. And taste, that's a tricky one. I don't know about ghostly tastes, but I'd take someone's word for it, I guess. Um, so really, no human sense is ruled out when you talk about this experience. But yeah, that's the big one. When you see
Yeah.
something that just doesn't fit.
Cool. So, other than the Paris catacombs, are there any other locations around the world that you're, really interested in, or that you've been to that you really want to go back to?
Oh yeah, so many. Well, not too far from you, I had the chance to go to the Tower of London after hours as a guest of one of the yeoman warders. It was amazing. I'd interviewed him for one of my books, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to be over in London," and he said, "Well, come see the changing of the keys ceremony, and you can have a drink in the pub and stuff." And I went, "Oh, that was amazing!" So I got to see the whole thing happen, and someone had told me that when the changing of the keys ceremony happens, that everybody's, your eyes are supposed to be front, God save the queen at the time, uh, and so on. But someone said, the ghost of Anne Boleyn, the headless ghost of Anne Boleyn, is sometimes seen by the edge of the Thames behind that whole thing. And so there's maybe 20 or 30 of us all watching this changing of the keys ceremony at night. And I'm the only dumb American that's looking the other way, because if her ghost is behind me, I don't want to miss that, right? Like,
Yeah.
what a missed opportunity. I didn't see her, but I'll tell you this, speaking to some of the yeoman warders in the pub, it was incredible. Those guys all have stories, all of them, and they're just matter of fact. in their chapel, they have these chairs that have kneelers, so that your kneeler is in the chair, the back of the chair in front of you. So you put it down and you kneel on it, for church. And he said the woman that cleans the place was telling him that she had put all the kneelers back up for the next day's service, and one by one they just started coming down, thunk, 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 thunk. And you can only imagine. And when you stand there and you hear the story and you look at that, you go, "Yep, I'd leave." I mean, you just or just experiencing strange things, seeing things, stuff levitating. And that's just part of the job. And these guys are military officers, and they've been military officers for, I believe, 20 years is the minimum before you're even eligible for that post.
Yeah.
So, just incredible stories. And I've been to the White House in Washington, D.C., and some of their staff have their experiences and stories to share. And I just love these buildings that have got so much history to them that everybody knows, but the insiders have stories to share. And those are some of my favorite haunts.
Cool. So you mentioned the White House. I recently watched your TED Talk that you did, which was obviously you discussed the White House in that. One of the things from that TED Talk was I think it was the overall title, and obviously the quote you put in at the end about how history is a ghost story.
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was just a really sort of interesting quote, and sums up the paranormal quite well, I think, from a sort of why people are interested in it and why it's popular perspective. Because I think, it is difficult, like you say, to separate ghost stories from history, because obviously they are intertwined.
Yeah, you can't. And another analogy I've used is that one of the things that frustrates me is when someone's just into the ghosts but not into the history, because I don't think you can have one without the other. And the example I use is, imagine if you go to see a play in a theater and the curtain opens and the stage is completely black. There's no props, there's nothing. And the actors come out and they're dressed completely in black, shirts and pants, and that's it. And trousers, forgive me. So they walk out on stage and they start acting. And you're saying, okay, where are we? When are we? Does this take place in the 1950s? Does it take place in the future? Are we in the country? Are we in the city? Like, what's going on? The history is the setting. That's the setting that shows you, like, oh, I see. We're in New York City in 1920. I can tell by this, and there's a few clues and the way they're dressed, and so that helps us to put it into a context, because that's what we're connecting to, is the past. And the whole unfinished business trope, to me, is really about us, living people, not dead ones. The dead are done, but we keep them around because we're haunted by maybe an unsolved murder or a tragedy that took place someplace that we know could happen again or could happen to us. And so we keep the story around, and maybe we literally keep the spirit of the people around because they're still serving us in some way.
Cool. In the TED Talk as well, you also mentioned the sort of when you contact, people and locations, and you mention the word ghost, it's sort of that reaction from them. How do you find, people are to change their view on that? How do you get around that sort of negative stigmatization that they have?
So I'm fortunate in that I work for many different sort of employers. So I work for the Travel Channel here in the U.S. when I work on Ghost Adventures, and I also work for PBS, which is public broadcasting, sort of like the BBC, but completely public funded, and, well, not completely public funded, but anyway, it's they don't have a lot of money, but everybody knows them. And then I also write books, and I work for newspapers and magazines. So there's always something I can offer you, even if you don't believe. I don't need you to believe in ghosts. That's sort of irrelevant. I'm fine with it if you call and say, I don't believe in any of that. Okay, that's fine. You have a story there, though. You have a storied location and history and a reputation that exists whether you like it or not. That's there, and that's the thing I want to check out. However, that being said, different parts of the country in the US, different parts of the world react to the idea of ghosts very differently. So where I live here in New England, sort of near Boston, I think we're more matter of fact about our haunts. We preserve history around here. We keep around old buildings. We take good care of them. Nothing compared to England, by the way. I mean, an old building here is 200 or 300 years old, and that's just an infant by your standards. But I remember I was talking to one of the docents at Ordsall Hall up near Manchester in the UK. And I said, hey, is this place haunted? And he said, like, don't be daft. It's a 700-year-old manor house. Of course it's haunted. And I went, yes, forgive me, my ignorant Americanness. I'm so sorry. I love that. I love that. In other parts of the US, someone might say, oh, no, we don't talk about that, right? It's either angels or demons. It's not, there's no such thing as ghosts. It's just God or the devil, and everything in between. And that's so fascinating to me, because the fact that there's a word for ghost, that we have a term for it, means it exists to some extent. And what do you do about that? So I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. Like, I don't, people can have their beliefs. That's completely okay. Some people sort of get it, that all right, well, this might be a marketing tool for some people, and people will go out of their way to come here if they like haunted places, even though I don't believe in them. Someone else might, and fine, whatever your reasons. I've seen it all at this point. I've seen people exploit their ghosts, sell them t-shirts you can buy. We're the most haunted pub in wherever,
Yeah.
and it's become a global, worldwide phenomenon, whether you believe it or not.
Cool. So, obviously, you mentioned Ghost Adventures there during that. You are, I believe, the researcher and one of the writers for Ghost Adventures. And have you been doing that for every episode?
Every one since episode 1.
Cool.
It started in 2008. And I had written books about haunted places all over. And Zach Bagans, the host and also the producer, called me and said, hey, we know you know haunts all over. Would you want to work on this show? And I was like, oh, I've never worked in television. I've worked on this subject for books and magazines and newspapers and the web, and why not TV? And so it was just supposed to be 8 episodes, but then it started to air, and it was a hit. And we've been working ever since. This is almost 15 years now, which is, for a show to go that long, is really, I mean, how many TV shows can you name make it 15 years? Like, very few, right? A few do, but like very few. And so to be part of something that's been that big has been really amazing.
Cool. So I'm curious, the role of writer for that show, what does that entail? Is that sort of researching the history and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I get, at this point now, I get told where we're going. We're going to go to this location. And then I start digging in on all the history. The very beginning part of the show is produced without apology, right? That's the setup. We have to set the stage. And so I help find people that have had stories that are going to come on and share those experiences. I give them all the details I can possibly find, any sort of strange history, murders, deaths, and so on, where the sightings take place. So when they go there, they know what happened where, or to the best of our knowledge. Now, once the investigation starts, once the lights go out, then it's reality. It's whatever happens. And then it becomes, much more of a traditional, like, reality show. But yeah, I work on that beginning part where I just give the guys everything I possibly can find on the haunt. And I know some people, I've heard some groups say, oh, I don't want to know anything, I just want to go in. I don't get that at all. I don't understand that. It's not my way. I mean, people are free to do what they want, obviously, but it's just so foreign to my way, that I'm like, well, how do you know what you're picking up on isn't something that's with you, not necessarily with the location? So I think, the more you know, the better. But that's always been my approach.
Cool. So yeah, I'm quite similar in that I like to know as much as I can about a location before I go there. I know there are other people in my group who are sort of, they'll turn up and they'll find out things as they happen, which I think sometimes it's nice to have a sort of mix of both in a group. And then having at least one person that can sort of confirm history and facts as they're sort of, uncovered.
Sure.
So one of the locations that was in an episode of Ghost Adventures I have visited, which is the Ancient Ram Inn.
Oh gosh, yeah, he passed away a couple of years ago, didn't he?
Yeah. So his daughter runs it now. We went there last year, and obviously, I think we all said going into it that because it was one of the locations featured in Ghost Adventures, it was sort of a much higher standing than, say, some of the other locations around, purely because it had that sort of, it's the sort of fame factor to it almost.
Well,
Was
that's
there anything?
exactly what it's not even almost. That's exactly what
Well,
it
yeah.
is. It becomes more famous, and the more shows that film at a location, like suddenly it becomes a thing, right? And that's the irony is that we started talking about legend tripping, right? What is legend but fame, right? Like, I
Mhm.
mean, they're slightly different, but they're in the same arena, you know? So yes, that place gets more famous, and and legend tripping really means that you want to become part of the story. That you heard enough about the ancient Ram Inn that you said, I actually want to go there.
Yeah.
And maybe you struck out, maybe nothing happened, and you went, I think it's all hype or whatever. Or maybe something did happen and you could come home and say, oh no, this is for real. That's what it is, right? You
Mhm.
went there to trip that legend and find out for yourself.
Cool.
And what
Yeah.
did you find? Don't leave me hanging here.
We had quite a weird experience there. When we
Mhm.
first entered or so later on in the night, we did sort of a final sweep before we were leaving, and we noticed for the first time that the word demon had been written on one of the mirrors downstairs, which
Whoa.
we sort of assumed we might have just missed it earlier on in the night. It's one of those things of, we don't know if we actually looked into that mirror intently enough to notice it. And then we went upstairs, and then when we came back downstairs, the word had been wiped out, and it's sort of I know it was none of us because we were all together the entire time, and I know there's no one else here. So at that point, what else can it be? Which is, that's the point we got to, and it's like, hang on, so that, it's something I definitely can't explain. Therefore, in my mind, it has to be paranormal because logic's essentially gone out the window with it.
Well, right. That's the thing, right? And that's when you go to any location. I'm always, if something weird happens, I want to figure it out. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe, maybe, oh, did you bump up against that? Oh, yeah, you bumped the table and it knocked that, and you figure it out. It's when you can't figure it out that things get really fun.
yeah.
That's the best part.
In terms of your sort of personal paranormal history, what would you say is your earliest memory of the paranormal?
Oh gosh, so I growing up where I did, I had friends who said their houses were haunted, and mine was not. Mine wasn't that old, but I had friends that said theirs were, and I was really intrigued. And also, I grew up in the town next to Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Yeah.
If you've seen any of the Conjuring movies,
Hmm.
and so back then, back in the 80s, Ed and Lorraine Warren were very much like local celebrities. They were not internationally renowned, although they would have told you they were. But sure, they've been to other countries and they've done media and stuff, but they're way more famous today than they ever were when they were alive.
Hmm.
Um, and so in October, we would go see them speak. They would share their stories and their evidence and so on. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, how intriguing that they get to go actually look for this stuff. And I was raised Roman Catholic, which I feel like I should mention that. It seems pertinent, where you really, in Catholicism, we've got so much stuff. My goodness, you've got God and the devil, and you've got angels and demons, and you've got saints and sinners, and you've got purgatory. And what even is purgatory, right? So you've got this whole spectrum. And so ghosts sort of fell in there somewhere anyway. You know what I mean? They're somewhere on that spectrum. And I sort of was just intrigued by the notion because I wanted something more than just being told that it's all there and
Hmm.
just pray and it'll be revealed to you. I prayed and it wasn't being revealed to me the way I kind of expected it to. And as I got older and I got more interested in the subject and started writing about it, and I got to go on ghost investigations and go out to like old buildings late at night and so on, like I got that ooey gooey feeling, this like, holy cow, this is really something interesting.
Hmm.
It just felt so much more tangible than sitting in a church pew. So it was really like, I remember, losing grandparents when I was very young and feeling like, wow, is it over or does that connection sort of go on? And I remember needing them. I felt like I still needed them, and
Hmm.
I just didn't believe that connection sort of ended. I remember seeing the my grandfather in a casket. He had died of old age. It's going to happen to all of us, but it hurts when it happens and you
Yep.
lose someone that you love. And I remember looking at him and thinking, wow, it doesn't look like him. I mean, of course it was him, but that thing that made him who he
Yeah.
was gone,
Yeah.
was missing.
That sort
And
of.
so yeah,
Yeah.
the life, the essence,
Hmm.
who a person is. And I think ever since then, I've sort of been chasing that, like, let me see it again. Let me find it. And I think that's a big part of what drives me.
Cool. So obviously you said you were in the sort of neighbouring town to Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Mhm.
Um, the Annabelle doll. I believe you had a
Yeah.
chance to meet the Annabelle doll sort of, I guess, almost before it became a cultural phenomenon.
Way before,
Yeah.
way before. Yeah. So, Annabelle, I've met Annabelle in, I don't know, 1985, something like that. Maybe, yeah, mid 80s or so.
Mhm.
And I was completely freaked out because, first of all, Ed told me the story in his basement, museum right in front of Annabelle, who was just inches away from me. And what scared me the most is that my sister had the same exact doll back home on her bed, because Annabelle is a Raggedy Ann
Mhm.
doll, which was a I don't know if did you get Raggedy Ann over in the
I
UK?
think we did. Yeah. I think they were sort
Yeah,
of.
so
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't even that huge here, but it was big enough, right?
Mhm.
That people had the doll, and my sister had the same damn doll. So the real Annabelle doll is just this Raggedy Ann doll that you could get at any store for not too many dollars, not very expensive. But it's the way Ed told the story, um, where you look at it and you go, "Oh, I don't believe in this." But shoot, someone else did enough, that the thing's behind glass now and people are petrified of it. And she got her own movie. My goodness, she got her own movie deal
Yeah.
eventually. And so when you see it in the movie, of course, that's nothing like what the actual doll looked like.
Mhm.
Nobody would cuddle with that doll in the movie, you know.
Yeah. No,
Um,
it lacks that sort of, like say, the doll in the movie lacks that sort of personal feel. That sort of, this could just be in your house as an object that kids play with. Whereas the one in the movie is very much a, this is an object that no one's going to go near. It's horrible.
So that comes down to an interesting point about sort of like narrative and stuff like that, right? So I got really fascinated in the past year with the devil, right? Just studying the origins of the devil and the
Mhm.
way different cultures have dealt with it. And most of what we think we know about what the devil looks like and where he lives and all that other stuff really comes from artists commissioned by the church, and many centuries after the Bible was written, because the devil became useful to the church, and so making him more popular. And he's like, like the wings and the horns and the fire and the rah, right, like scary, frightening, horrid things. And I'm just like, I don't think the devil would look like that, because if you saw that thing coming a mile away, you'd run, right?
Yeah.
You'd know to stay away from that. The devil is going to be charming. The devil is going to wear a nice suit or a nice dress,
Yeah.
and look very attractive. And that's way more evil than something that's just like, I just want to kill. Rah! You're like, ah, come on. I know to run from that.
Yeah, the
Um,
devil's not going to, like you say, look like a sort of generic monster, because it's
no,
not
that's
going to
no
be able to
fun.
achieve its. It needs to be seductive and suave
Yeah.
and, yeah, inviting almost.
And then and the other thing too that happens when you get into this work, right, is now people start, you mentioned it before, demon, right? And I've always struggled with that. Like, as soon as you say demon, you're now really deep into a belief system, right? Where um like, I mean, was Hitler a demon? I mean, or was he just a really bad person, misguided, Jack the Ripper, right? Demon, or just broken serial killer, so
Yeah,
I understand that we need these labels, but when you, especially as an investigative group, especially when you go into someone's home, where they live, and you say, oh, I think you've got a demon, we've got to run, we're going to go back home, and good luck with this. And you're like,
yeah,
what, you can't do anything with a demon, you can't negotiate, right? You can't. If it's a person, you're like, all
hmm,
right, I'm a person, it was a person, so I can sort of understand how I might feel if I were in your ghostly shoes. But demon, now we're into, like, now we need holy water and stuff. And what if the
yeah,
demon's like not Catholic, or you know, then
yeah,
what?
yeah.
I don't know.
I think the sort of religious side of it there as well, like you say, sort of sways the interpretation of it. So, like you
Yeah.
say, if you say it's a demon and you're talking to someone who doesn't believe in religion, or is atheist or something like that, they're going to see that a lot differently to if you're talking to a devout Catholic and you say that it's a demon, and it's, yeah,
Right,
that
you're
sort of
gonna
thing.
scare somebody who doesn't. I mean, like, this, what do I do? Do I move? Do I need to leave my home? I mean, that's That's a tough one. And how do you know anyway, right? Like, how do you know? Um, and so these are some of the questions. And by the way, again, what I love about this subject is it forces some deep thinking if you allow it to, right? If you allow it to go below the surface, you really can have some amazing discussions about reality and religion and belief and power and good and bad and everything in between.
Cool. So going back to Ghost Adventures briefly, are there any sort of
Mhm.
moments or locations from Ghost Adventures that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, there was a place, we were the first to film there. A lot of others have been there since, but it's called Penhurst State School.
Yeah.
And it's right outside of Philadelphia here in the United States. And Penhurst was it was an asylum for people with, mental disabilities. Like there's so many everywhere, right? And like so many others, it got overcrowded and so on. Now, when we first got there, I remember thinking like, all right, abandoned asylum, I know what to do. We've done tons of these. Like this, I got it. But as I started to go deeper, it turns out we have a federal law here on how you can and can't treat people with mental disabilities because of atrocities that took place there specifically. And I know it's not unique, but I mean, it was so bad that laws were changed.
Yeah.
And these atrocities took place in the 1970s. 1970s, like not 1800s, not 1700s, 1970s. And so you're like, how can this be? And the conditions were so terrible. And so we got to speak to former doctors and nurses and patients. And when you learned about the conditions in there, you're like, i- if you heard that someone was treating like dogs, like canines, the way that these human beings were, we would lynch them. We would find trees and we would hang ropes, and nobody would apologize for lynching everybody involved. These were human beings that were being kept in
Yeah.
sometimes dog kennels or chained into beds and uh, you know soiling themselves because they can't get out of bed and use a bathroom. It's awful. And so that building was haunted because I guess it should be haunted. And I felt like we could expose this really horrible thing that happened, because sometimes that's what a haunting does, right? Is it forces
Hmm.
us to look in the mirror and get a little bit uncomfortable about what we see looking back at us. And maybe if that works, if all things work properly, maybe there won't ever be another Penhurst. And we can sort of do our part to say, like, this isn't how we treat people. This is why it's haunted. This is why these horrible things happened. Let's let's not let this happen again. And so I felt like that one was just big, like really morally big, in addition to being a giant spooky place.
So for those, obviously for the Ghost Adventure stuff, do you go to the locations as well? Are you sort of also there with them?
Sometimes, quite often, I just do my research remotely.
Hmm.
But sometimes there's been a few episodes I've been on, a few
Yeah.
specials. The mini series, I often had to go ahead of time and sort of scout everything out and make sure we had all the elements that we needed, from
Yeah.
people to places and stuff like that. So yeah, so sometimes I get to go and scout, but often it's just phone and internet and
Hmm.
things like that.
Of course. So were you a part of the original documentary as well, or were you like TV exclusive?
Yeah, no, they had made the documentary on their own. I wasn't part of that.
Cool.
And then the documentary became kind of like their pilot episode.
Yeah.
And once it went to series, then I got involved with the first episode. So yeah, I didn't get to work on the documentary.
Cool. Um, so obviously now the paranormal is a very big part of your life.
Yeah.
When when you first went into journalism, I take it that was, no connection to the paranormal. That was just sort of a straight up
Well, so
sort
I
of
was a features
journalism.
writer. Yeah.
Hmm.
So being a features guy, I loved October, because October we would go look for local haunted places and interview people that had ghost experiences and find out sometimes the history backed up some of those experiences. And so I loved those feature stories. And the very first thing I did after working as a newspaper is I started a website called ghostvillage.com, still around 24 years later. And that's the place where I started putting my writing on the subject, because I was working a regular job and I really missed writing, and that was a subject that I loved. And the newspaper that I was writing for in 1997 or so, 98, we had a website. We were one of the first to have a website, and I had an interview with Ed and Lorraine Warren that was in there, and they said, the company that was running it for us said that page, that interview, gets something like 10 times the web traffic of every other page combined. And I went, oh, people like this stuff. And so I'm like, well, that newspaper went out of business, and I'm like, well, that article's mine. Let me put it up on my Ghost Village website. And I did, and then put up other articles. And I said, tell me your experiences. And then people started writing in with their own ghost experiences, and it grew. It grew from 6 pages to 20 pages to 100 to thousands of pages of content. And it led to me writing books, and it led to me working on ghost adventures, and sort of became the foundation of everything. So I always loved the subject. I never thought I would make a living with it one day. And it took,
Hmm.
probably it was around 2004, 2005, where I said, this is my job now. I guess this is what I do. And I can't imagine doing anything else at this point. I truly love it.
Cool. So another question I've got is, I guess, is where you're at now, or is, the paranormal, a route you think that younger you would have been able to foresee in any way for yourself?
No, no, definitely not. Uh, I didn't. I mean, I think like any young person, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I mean, I liked music, and I liked ghost stories, and I liked all kinds of stuff. And I guess I didn't give too much thought about what my job would be. I knew I wanted to be around writing. That I knew. That I think I knew pretty young. I probably knew that by my late teens. But what that and then but then at some point you go, oh, no one can make a living at that. I don't want to starve to death. I mean, I like pizza and beer too much, and those cost money. And so as I got a little older, and started selling out, working for an ad agency and working for a software company and so on. Um, I missed it was feeding my wallet, but not my soul.
Yeah.
And so I missed it. I just really missed it. And so Ghost Village allowed me to get back to it. And then at some point to be able to transition to just doing that was just, I mean, I feel very blessed. And if I had to quit tomorrow, it would be okay. Like I've stood on the mountain. It was great. Um, but I don't think I have to. I think there's more projects keep coming in, and
Yeah.
I've done this long enough now that I've become known for it, and people that are working on things come to me now, and it's been great. It's really, I'm lucky to have that.
So I just want to get your sort of views on a couple of individual sort of famous cases and, famous cryptids, things that sort of famous aspects of the paranormal, I guess, and just maybe
Sure.
see if I can get a sentence or two about a couple that come to mind. So I think start off Bigfoot.
Big, what can you say about Bigfoot? I mean, I I sometimes wonder if maybe everything paranormal, ghosts, aliens, cryptids, right? What if all of those things make perfect sense somewhere on the timeline, but not necessarily right now? Ghosts are easy, right? You see a soldier from, a Civil War soldier or something. You're like, well, that made perfect sense years ago, but not now. Or a woman in Victorian dress, right? You'd be like, okay, she made sense a century ago or more, but not today. Aliens, why do they look so human? Why do they have heads and arms and fingers and stuff? Like, maybe that's what we're going to look like a 500,000 years from now. I don't know. Bigfoot, maybe Bigfoot made perfect sense a few million years ago, but not so much now. I don't know. But Bigfoot, yeah, my goodness, keeps coming up. And I have the same skeptical questions that lots of other people have. Why don't we find a dead one? How come we haven't captured one yet? How come we
Yeah.
haven't shot one yet and brought the body around? I have all those same questions, and the only conclusion I can come up with is that Bigfoot is way more weird than we can possibly understand.
Cool. So on to a haunting now. The Villisca Axe Murder House is one that I have a relatively sort of keen interest in. I don't want to say I like the story of it, but I'm invested in it. I find it an interesting both case and then haunting to go with it.
Yeah, so Villisca is in the real heartland of America, right? Like it's in Iowa. It's this tragic tale where this entire family was killed, by an axe murderer, and the murderer was never found, right? I mean, that was he got away with it. And that'll haunt the community forever and ever, right? Because nobody likes someone getting away with murder.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter that it was, over a century ago. It makes no difference. Like it's an injustice that sticks around. And I think that's part of the reason that it keeps coming up. Like someone got away with hacking up an entire family in a quiet little Iowa town, a farming town. And and so yeah, that's one of those cases that I think everybody knows who's a fan of the subject, because it was such a horrific thing,
Yeah.
and because the crime was unpunished.
And then back to cryptids, Mothman. What are
Yeah,
your...
Mothman. So Mothman, where I live here in New England, there's an Algonquin legend of something called a pomola, which is a giant half bird, half man. And then also there's the notion, especially in the American Southwest, of a thunderbird. And it's the same thing, like a half man, half bird, and it's called a thunderbird because the wings are so large that when it flaps, it sounds like a clap of thunder. And while people may say like, "Oh, I don't possibly believe in that," well, the United States Air Force does, because we've got. You may have heard of the Blue Angels, which is actually the F-16s that fly at air shows and things in formation really tight.
Yeah.
That's the Navy. The Air Force has its own, slightly lesser known, famous here, group of F-16s that fly at air shows, and they are called the Thunderbirds, with big Native American Thunderbirds painted underneath those fighter jets. So in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, with Mothman, uh, people have connected the sighting of this strange creature, which matches the description of the pomola and the Thunderbird, although this one had glowing red eyes, which is unique anyway.
Yeah.
But people have connected that with the collapse of the bridge in town, where people died. And it's quite possible there's no connection whatsoever. It's just people happen to see this thing and the bridge collapsed, and we try to connect the two because we don't, because we're trying to make reason out of chaos. I don't know, but it's interesting that creatures by that description show up in cultures all over the world that we don't think had any contact with each other. And then someone saw one in quite modern history. So I don't know. In Maine, the state of Maine here in the U.S., Mount Katahdin, which is the tallest mountain in Maine, that's one of the sightings of pomola. That's one of the places where they believe the half bird, half man, dwells, and that sticks around today too. So we don't let go of these old ideas easily, and the skeptic in me asks why, right? Unless someone's seeing something and the story's kept alive by another sighting, and in West Virginia, they called it Mothman.
Cool. So another haunted place that I want to ask about, that again I know was featured on Ghost Adventures, is the Island of the Dolls.
Oh yeah, in Mexico.
Yeah.
That's a really weird one, because we don't know really of deaths per se on that island, but there's all these creepy dolls that have been brought there. And the thing about a doll, right, is it's a distortion, like any doll ever, right? And the other thing, I mean, I've got a daughter. She's 15 now, but like she loved her little stuffed animals, as a kid, or teddy bears and so on. And I would argue that like she has this one favorite, Paws, this teddy bear named Paws, and she loved him into existence. If he wasn't in bed with her when she was young, she couldn't go to sleep. We would have to turn the house upside down to find the damn thing. Paws has had formal dinners with us at the table because he was that important, and she loved him into the existence. I know he's just fabric and cotton and so on, but he means so much more to her. And there are many, we all know there are countless dolls out there that meant a lot to various children, and even to us. And then they end up on this island, some of them, where maybe they were loved once, and it's just so creepy. I think what we do is we're connecting to the energy that must have been rubbed off on many of these dolls, belonging to so many people, and the fact that they're discarded. Like when I see a teddy bear on the side of the highway, my heart breaks. I just assume that was some little kid's paws who like was messing around and it fell out of the window, and dad wouldn't stop to get it, and like you're gonna just cry for the rest of your life. And you look at it's like breaks your heart. Like just and it's nothing. It's just fabric and cotton, but it wasn't nothing to somebody. And I think that's the power of the Island of the Dolls.
So I think that sort of covers everything I wanted to talk about today. So I think the final question I've got is what's next for you? Are there any sort of particular projects you're working on at the minute you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I'm working on it. Well, I just finished a new book, a Christmas book that'll come out next year in time for Christmas 2023. It'll come out in time for this Christmas. It's called The Fright Before Christmas. It's about all the various monsters that have plagued the holiday for many centuries.
Cool.
I'm excited about that, and I've got my weekly podcast, New England Legends, where we explore strange stories in New England. Everything we cover: cryptids and ghosts and hauntings and weird history and roadside oddities, and that's been a fun project to work on for years now. Still working on new episodes of Ghost Adventures, and I'm starting a new very weird live stream show soon, like this week. It's we're going to be exploring really strange news articles from the past.
Cool.
Like century plus. The tagline is, these are all the headlines you missed, probably because you weren't born yet. So going to look at like odd, strange news from the past.
Cool. Awesome. I'll try and check that out and keep an eye on that.
Sure.
That does sound quite interesting.
It's fun. So I spend so much time in the newspaper archives for Ghost Adventures and everything else that I do. I'm just like, there's so much weird, and I just started saving them recently. I'm like, this is crazy. And I'll just save it, and then it's piling up.
Cool. So yeah, I guess it makes sense to do something with it, and that does sound like a good way of using it. So yeah, I think that brings us to the end. Unless there's anything else you want to add.
No, thanks for having me. It was good to talk to you.
Well, yeah, it was great to chat. So yeah, thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you later.
Sounds good. Thanks, Scott.
So once again, a big thank you to Jeff for joining me today. You can check out his podcast, the New England Legends podcast, over on his YouTube channel, which I'll link down below. You can also find Jeff's books over on Amazon, and I'll also put Jeff's social links down below as well. So once again, a big thank you to Jeff for joining me today. I've been Scott from TEPIS Paranormal, and I'll catch you in the next episode.